Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to The Claverings by Anthony Trollope. This is our read aloud. This book is not going to survive, but this is our read aloud. I am reading this book to you with copious editorial interruptions. We've had a little bit of a break while I had a hedgehog over for a guest, but that's not going to show in the playlist, so it hardly matters. So we are moving on. Although the break does matter in one way because it's been a while since we've touched base on this story. I'm not quite sure where I am. But we're going to read now chapter 28. We are up to chapter 28 of The Claverings. So let's see what's in store. For several days after leaving Nantucket, nothing above hatches was seen of Captain Ahab. The mates regularly relieved each other at the watches, and for aught that could be seen to the contrary, they seemed to be the only commanders of the ship. Only they sometimes issued from the cabin with orders so sudden and peremptory that after all it was plain they but commanded vicariously. Yes, their supreme lord and dictator was there, though hitherto unseen by any eyes not permitted to penetrate into the now sacred retreat of the cabin. Every time I ascended to the deck from my watches below, I instantly gazed aft to mark if any strange face were visible, for my first vague disquietude touching the unknown captain, now in the seclusion of the sea, became almost a perturbation. This was strangely heightened at times by the ragged Elijah's diabolical incoherences uninvitedly recurring to me with a subtle energy I could not have conceived of. But poorly I could withstand them, much as in the other moods I was almost ready to smile at the solemn whimsicalities of that outlandish prophet of the wharves. Remember, this ragged lunatic named who calls himself Elijah comes to Ishmael and Queequeg with prophecies, with weird, vague presentiments about Captain Ahab that very much make Ahab out to be a supernatural being and a deadly omen. And these feelings, of course, you can brush them off as just the ravings of a dockside lunatic, except that it's extremely unrare, almost impossible. It's extremely rare, almost unheard of. For a vessel's at this time, for a vessel's captain of any kind, whaling, merchant, whatever, to not be visible this far out at sea, to have never appeared to the crew, that's virtually unheard of. It is very ominous. But whatever it was of apprehensiveness or uneasiness, to call it so, which I felt, yet whenever I came to look about me in the ship, it seemed against all warranty to cherish such emotions. For though the harpooners, with that great body of the crew, were a far more barbaric, heathenish, and motley set than any of the tame merchant ship companies which my previous experience had made me acquainted with, still I ascribed this, and rightly ascribed it, to the fierce uniqueness of the very nature of that wild Scandinavian vocation in which I had so abandonedly embarked. Harpooners are just roughhoused by nature, because their nature is to kill people. But it was especially the aspect of the three chief officers of the ship, the mates, which was most forcibly calculated to allay these colourless misgivings and induce confidence and cheerfulness in every presentiment of the voyage. Three better, more likely sea officers and men, each in his own different way, could not readily be found, and they were every one of them Americans. A Nantucketer, a Vineyarder, and a Cape man, being Cape Cod. Now, it being Christmas when the ship was shot from out of her harbor, for a space we had biting polar weather, though all the time running away from it to the southward, and by every degree and minute of latitude which we sailed, gradually leaving that merciless winter and all of its intolerable weather behind us. It was one of those less lowering but still gray and gloomy enough mornings in the transition, when with a fair wind the ship was rushing through the water with a vindictive sort of leaping and melancholy rapidity, that as I mounted the deck at the call of the forenoon watch, so soon as I leveled my gaze toward the taffrail, foreboding shivers ran over me. Reality outrun apprehension. Captain Ahab stood upon his quarterdeck. There seemed no sign of common bodily illness about him, nor of the recovery from any. There's been intimated that Ahab has been unwell. He looked like a man cut away from the stake, when the fires had overwhelmingly wasted the limbs without consuming them, or taking away one particle from their compacted, aged robustness. His whole high, broad form seemed made of solid bronze, and shaped in an unalterable mold like Cellini's cast of Perseus. Threading its way out from among his gray hairs and continuing right down one side of his tawny, scorched face and neck till it disappeared in his clothing, you saw a slender, rod-like mark, lividly whitish. It resembled that perpendicular seam sometimes made in the straight, lofty trunk of a great tree when the upper lightning tearingly darts down it, and without wrenching a single twig, peels and grooves out the bark from top to bottom, ere running off into the soil, leaving the tree still greenly alive, but branded. Whether that mark was born with him, or whether it was the scar left by some desperate wound, no one could certainly say, but by some tacit consent, throughout the voyage, little or no allusion was made to it, especially by the mates. But once Tashtego Sr., an old gay-head Indian among the crew, superstitiously asserted that not till he was fully 40 years old did Ahab become that way branded, and then it came upon him not in the fury of any mortal fray, but in an elemental strife at sea. Yet this wild hint seemed inferentially negatived by what a gray Manxman insinuated, an old sepulchral man who, having never before sailed out of Nantucket, had never ere this laid eyes upon wild Ahab. So I think Tashtego Sr., a Gayhead man, from Gayhead used to be the name of an area on the Cape, where it's probably likely that he's not recording to any mystical provenance. He probably knows the story. He's probably accurate. Whereas a Manx man who just shipped out and never seen Ahab before the morning is probably not going to know anything about it. What was the fray at sea, though? Is Ishmael's metaphor here a little more knowing than it seems? Maybe a little more knowing than Ishmael himself knows? Was Ahab struck by lightning? Nevertheless, the old sea traditions, the immemorial credulities, popularly invested this old Manx man with preternatural powers of discernment, so that no white sailor seriously contradicted him when he said that if ever Ahab should be tranquilly laid out, which might hardly come to pass, so he admitted, then whoever should do that last office for the dead would find the birthmark on him from crown to sole that will transfer to whoever kills Ahab, or whoever's there to lay him out in his coffin. Is this cleverness on Melville's part? Is this Melville's allusion to, or slight acknowledgement of the fact that when Ahab does die, it will be at the hands of a being marked white? Maybe that stem to stern white mark won't be all that visible on the thing that kills Ahab. So powerfully did the whole grim aspect of Ahab affect me, and the livid brand which streaked it, that for the first few moments I hardly noted that not a little of this overbearing grimness was owing to the barbaric white leg upon which he partly stood. It had previously come to me that this ivory leg had at sea been fashioned from the polished bone of a sperm whale's jaw. Aye, he was dismasted off Japan, said the old gay-head Indian once, but like his dismasted craft, he shipped another mast without coming home for it. He has a quiver of them. I was struck with the singular posture he maintained. Upon each side of the Pequod's quarterdeck, and pretty close to the mizzen shrouds, there was an auger hole bored about half an inch or so into the plank. His bone leg steadied in that hole, one arm elevated and holding by a shroud, Captain Ahab stood erect, looking straight out beyond the ship's ever-pitching prow. There was an infinity of firmness, fortitude, a determinate, unsurrenderable willfulness in the fixed and fearless forward dedication of that glance. Not a word he spoke, nor did his officers say aught to him, though by all their manifest gestures and expressions they plainly showed the uneasy, if not painful, consciousness of being under the troubled master eye. And not only that, but moody, stricken Ahab stood before them with a crucifixion in his face, in all the nameless, regal, overbearing dignity of some mighty woe. Ere long, from his first visit in the air, he withdrew into his cabin, but after that morning he was every day visible to the crew, either standing in his pivot hole, or seated upon an ivory stool he had, or heavily walking the deck. As the sky grew less gloomy, indeed began to grow a little genial, he became still less and less a recluse, as if, when the ship had sailed from home, nothing but the dead, wintry bleakness of the sea had kept him so secluded. And by it came to pass that he was almost continually in the air, But as yet, for all that he said or perceptibly did on at last sunny deck, he seemed as unnecessary there as another mast. But the Pequod was only making a passage now, not regularly cruising. Nearly all whaling preparatives needing supervision, the mates were fully competent to do. So there was little or nothing out of himself to employ or excite Ahab now. And thus chase away, for that one interval, the clouds that layer upon layer were piled upon his brow, as ever all clouds choose the loftiest peaks to pile themselves upon. Nevertheless, ere long, the warm, warbling persuasiveness of the pleasant holiday weather we came to seemed gradually to charm him from his mood. For, as when the red-cheeked dancing girls, April and May, trip home to the wintry misanthropic woods, even the barest, ruggedest, most thunder-cloven old oak will at least send forth some few green spouts to welcome such glad-hearted visitants. Another comparison with a thunderstruck oak. Not just an oak, but an oak that's been struck by lightning. So Ahab did, in the end, a little respond to the playful allurings of that girlish air. More than once did he put forth the faintest blossom of a look, which in any other man would have soon flowered out in a smile. Almost. He doesn't smile, but he almost does. He's lightening a little. Being at sea, the sea voyage is doing wonders for him. As you would expect, it's doing wonders even for Ahab. It can't fix him, though. It can't cure him. That description of Ahab matches well with all the presentiment, the foreshadowing that we've had all this time. Keep in mind, it's been all these chapters without this central character showing up. We've heard a lot about him, not only from the ragged dockside prophet Elijah, but also from the two captains, Bildad and Peleg, who are fitting out the Pequod. We've heard all sorts of presentiments about him, but we haven't seen him until now. And what a sight. A man cut fresh from the stake with a crucifixion in his face. So there you go. That is our chapter, and we will be moving on next time. And who knows where we'll go from here now that we're back to rereading the Claverings. Thank you, BookTube.